Hey guys, someone again here from WynnStrength.com on my training vlog reviewing THOR'S Power Program. Right now we're on week 9, which kicks off phase 3 of this 12-week, 3-phase program based on the Australian Strength Coach's program for Hafthor Bjornsson to train for the 2018 World's Strongest Man competition. If you haven't already, check out my previous videos outlining weeks 1 through 8. Right now we go to day 1, which is squats. So here we go with the warm-up protocol for my squats. I pretty much run a warm-up protocol for every movement I do. I literally just put my shoes on and knee sleeves, and here I am squatting for the first time. There's no general warm-up, no foam rolling, no stretching, no activation, no nothing. Just start squatting. I'll go through the empty bar, or the emptiest bar I can get, for a couple of reps, couple of sets, in order to get the feeling just right. If something doesn't feel good, I'll probably stick with a couple extra sets of the empty bar just so that my knees and hips feel good. Otherwise, I'll just move on with a 45-pound plate, and as you can see here, just alternating with a 45 out of 25, out of 45 and a 25, and the rep scheme I'll use is basically the same reps I'll use for my working sets. That way I can tell how heavy the weight will feel all the way up. So 200 pounds for a set of 20 is going to be different from 200 pounds for a set of 2. So if I warm up with more or less reps of my working sets, I won't really be able to gauge ultimately how heavy that feels. I think it's a great way to warm up because it allows you to tailor the day's working sets for how fatigued, ready your body is for that particular day. By being able to base the weights on a previous movement, you can adjust the weights if you're too tired for the day, or if the weights felt really light, you can actually increase the weight for that day. So this is adding a little bit of RPE style weight selection to the weight training here. So here we have the actual working set here at 370 pounds for a set of 3. So my last weight set was 360 and that felt good, so let's pump it up to the 370 for a set of 3. Haven't touched the SSB squats for about 4 weeks now. They're actually feeling a lot better. Figuring out more how to use the movement, which is quite cool. So more vertical back angle. I'm actually keeping my elbows as close to the torso as possible, not flaring them out. I found that helps a lot, as well as pulling the handlebars away from me. That's either going to be, it's not really pushing it up or down, but more pulling it away so the bar is getting pushed into my neck almost. So you can see the back staying pretty vertical. The weight is looking a little nicer than before. My knees don't travel as far forward as they normally do, and I think that's just because of the setup of the movement. A lot of the weight is shifted back, so I do find the heeled weightlifting shoe really works well for the SSB, just because of the way the weight is set up and the moment and arms of the weight on your back. So we do have 2 double substitutions here. The first one will be the power clean. I haven't power cleaned in a couple of months now, but I was really looking forward to doing that. So instead of doing a yoke walk, we have some power cleans, just because I don't have a yoke nor the space to walk around with a barbell on my back. The third accessory movement, or the third final movement for the day, is the pause squats. I'm enjoying these because it helps you work on some technique. If you can tell my knee angle here, it doesn't, once it comes forward, it sets there for the bottom half of that squat, or the bottom quarter of the squat, which really forces you to engage the quads a bit more. Pause squats are a great place to hone in on technique, because that pause at the bottom takes away some of that bounce, takes away some of that stretch reflex, and allows you to really hone in on the technique. And here we have some slow motion footage of the power clean. The main thing you want to look out for with the power clean is the bar travels in a straight bar path for the up until that hook part at the top. So you want to hoop under, and then it'll hook a little bit back at the top. You really don't want to use it as an arm pull. It's an explosive movement, so arms straight, straight, straight. Then you get a shrug, and that's when you want to think of shooting your elbows under the bar rather than pulling the bar up. That way it deactivates any bicep or arm movement, because that's not where the power is generating from. If you think about it, you kind of whipping the bar up, if that makes sense. When you start doing it and watch some replay, you'll see as it comes up, it starts off slowly, and then right when it hits just the mid-thigh, I scoop under it with a whipping motion, and that propels the bar up onto the shoulders. This is where I find the iPhone or the Droid phone to be really great with that slow motion footage, because that's just way too quick to look at for a beginner at analysis at real-time speed. So now we move on to day 2, which is vertical pushing and pulling. Super solid here with 175 for triples on the overhead press. Really focusing on trying to make that head shoot forward once it clears the bar. The one thing I am noticing with the overhead press is if I lag or delay in getting my head pushed forward, the weight feels a lot heavier. So at lighter weights, I'm really focused on getting that head to scoot forward. So you want to think of opening the window and putting your head through it. And the quicker you can push your head through, the easier the weight feels. Because your center of balance is more in line over the midfoot, which is the biggest point here. You want to make sure the barbell stays over your midfoot so you can generate the most force this way. So you can see as my head scoots forward, the weight shoots up wherever that head movement happens. So it's like struggle, struggle. Once the head moves, it pops up. That's also a sticking point. So if I can work on driving that head through as soon as possible, it almost removes that sticking point. And here we have the paused bench, just like the paused squat. This is another great movement to hone in on technique and drive some more volume without adding too much intensity, while still maintaining that high stress on the chest and the triceps. And then I've supersetted that with the trusty pendlay row, 195 pounds. Didn't quite get to the 225, wasn't feeling it. Now we move on to day 3, which is some deadlifts. Again, I think I've been able to capture some of the warm-up sets that I like to do. The first warm-up set for the day is actually about 10 reps of 3 sets of Romanian deadlifts out of the rack. I just like to do those a little slower, just to get the blood flowing in the entire back. It makes it a lot easier than to try and do empty bar deadlifts from the floor. So then you can see here the weight progression up, just like the squats, adding 45s and 25s with the same reps that I'll use on the way up. So that was the final warm-up set. Here we have the working sets, triples for 395. I like to do them barefoot every now and then. When it gets heavy, barefoot is kind of nicer because you're closer to the ground, decreasing that range of motion by about an inch or so. And really you want this is ideal for the deadlift because there's nothing in between your feet and the floor. Also, you can see my weight shifting forward. The heel picks up there a little bit at the start of the movement, so I could work to shift that weight back in the foot. Trying to get the same setup every time. Activate the lats a bit, get a big deep breath. So you can see it's not quite the smoothest pull. So the heels lift up a little bit. And the hips do shoot up like a little fraction before the rest of me does. So let's try on this third set. Probably not going to be great because the fatigue set in. But I do like the alternate grip with some chalk. Yeah, there is some backwards hip shifting, so at least the heels aren't shooting up quite as much. So that's good. The knees shoot back a fair bit, so I could stand to use a little bit more leg drive, keep those shins at the same angle for the start of the lift. But barefoot training great because on the replay you can see exactly where your feet movement, where your weight is shifting on your feet. Here we have some over the shoulder sandbag throws at 100 pounds. The Get RX bag is great. I'm kind of abusing that to see how long it lasts. So they don't recommend throwing them, so I don't know if this is throwing necessarily, but it is dropping from my shoulder height at the very least. This movement I think is really cool. I guess you could similarize it, if you didn't have a sandbag, to a heavy kettlebell swing, because you're doing that explosive hip hinge. That's kind of where I'm trying to drive that weight over. I'm not really pulling the weight up, more as I am with the power clean, thrusting the weight up so that the momentum swings that weight behind me. And if I didn't get enough, I can at least push that over my shoulder with the arms. But sandbag training is really cool. It's kind of awkward in the way the weight is. It's not a perfect thing to just grip onto, so it kind of does help with grip and tension. That is very tiring though. And then the final movement, the accessory supersetting, is stiff-legged deadlifts. These ones are, you want to keep the legs as straight as flexibility allows, and you want to touch the rep down after every set. Similar to an RDL, except you just pretty much go all the way down to the floor. If you can have the flexibility, your legs would look a lot straighter than mine do. I like to think of keeping the shins as vertical as possible and making the butt stick out as much as I can. That way the back stays locked in, the knees stay as straight as possible, and you really get a nice deep stretch in the hamstrings. This was sets of 12, so I did have to keep the weight quite light. Now we move on to the final day, day 4, horizontal pushing and pulling, bench press day. I didn't quite get to capture the warm-up sets for the bench press. We did work up to 255 for sets of 3. Here we have 245, the final warm-up. They felt really great. I do like to wear the wrist wraps for the heavy sets, just because it adds a little bit of security and just feels better on the arms. I know in some competitions you're not allowed to use wrist wraps, but I'm not competing, so not really an issue for me. Whatever allows you to lift weights for longer with less pain is what I would recommend you do, provided you have a full range of motion. So if using wrist wraps takes away some wrist pain, then totally use those. So I've been working on that leg drive, trying to push my head to the mirror, or like to the top of the bench is my cue. Way more stability, so you don't see my body rocking around as much on the lift off or on the touchdown on the chest, which is kind of something I look for in the bottom of the bench. The more you move, the less stable you are, obviously, so the less the whole base moves, the more stable it is, and the more force you're able to output against that barbell. So that's kind of the goal you're looking for in the bench press. Make that base as stable as possible. One cue I've learned is try and drive as much of your traps into the bar so it actually ends up you pushing down and into it. That doesn't really work when there's an empty bar, because you'll have the tendency to slide off the bar, off the bench. So this works when you start adding weight, so like 135 and up. It really helps with creating that tension, but you can feel that when you set up and practice. So we have the first accessory lift is pin press, overhead presses. I like to keep this at chin height. The pin press is cool for getting a little bit of overload and taking out that stretch reflex at the bottom of the lift. I like the chin height because it just removes that little inch of movement and makes it a tiny bit easier. I've supersetted that with some weighted chin-ups. Again, I like the working in the same plane, opposing muscle groups, so overhead press, chin-ups, great. Bench press, rowing, another great combination there. I do like adding weight to the chin-up. I think when you're not having to do maximal reps, adding some weighted variety, or adding some weight to this is a really good way to overload and really generate some arm growth, I think. So we have the second set of the pin press. So you can see it stops from a dead start, and you're really able to hone in on the technique because you can feel it takes away a little bit of danger for some reason, because you have the pins there. It's not going to fall on your head. You can add a little bit more stability to the movement with that pin, with the pin being there. You're able to press off of it in a weird way than you are if you're just floating with the weight. And it just helps drive in some technique. So it does slow you down at the bottom just a little bit, so it makes it a tiny little bit of a pause or a tempo movement, which drives up a little bit more volume. and because I wasn't going for max reps or time, adding that 45-pound weight to the chin-ups there is helping some arm growth. And that about wraps it up for the week 9 of Thor's Power Program. Add your comment down below if you're using the program too, how you're finding it. I'm wrapping it up. Just a heads up, there are a lot of substitutions this week and for this final phase, just because it does get hyper specific for strongman training and I lack a lot of that necessary equipment. So don't use this as a review of the program for phase 3 necessarily, because it's not really phase 3 of the program. It's my interpretation of the program with as close to similar movement patterns as I can get with the limited equipment I have. As usual, I'll leave the links for the strength program itself, their Instagrams, their contact details. Check out my blog, WynnStrength.com, for a weekly training update as to how I'm going with the program, and some other tips and insights I may come along across the month and just write about it. So thanks for watching, thanks for your time, and tune in next week for week 10.